Well, I want to thank everybody for joining today. This is actually our very first Build Your Autodesk Software Up and Ready IQ webinar. And today we're going to be talking about Autodesk network licensing. This is a topic that a good portion of our user base is involved with. And we have David and David both here from our installation licensing team here to give you a demonstration, talk about the in and outs, as well as answer any questions you have throughout the entire webinar. So what you notice within the GoToWebinar application on the right-hand side is that there's a questions panel. You're welcome to ask any sort of question that you have on this topic or anything else within Autodesk, and we'll do our best to answer that question or get information sent to you later. Okay. So at this point, go to the next slide.
This is the first one. So the first thing is the webinar format. The big thing that our team wants to do is basically we want to build your software up and ready IQ. We're going to be tag teaming. We have a presenter, myself, and David Demkowski. He's going to be the moderator, checking out the chat and questions portion of our webinar. You can also ask. We're going to have a 30-minute presentation, and then we're going to have 30 minutes of Q&A. And you can also ask questions at any time in the chat window, and then we may bring it back up at the very end. And it's going to be over easy. It's like we want to boost your IQ, and it's going to be over easy. So before we even get started, the first thing, we have 3 of them that are up and coming. The first one is, the network licensing IQ. We're going to be discussing how to set up the license server from start to finish. We're going to also give you some tips for some of the more IT savvy type of people. We're going to be uploading our presentation at that URL. It's basically Up and Ready IQ1, and we'll be putting a recording on our YouTube channel at some point, and I'll make a note of it on our in the uploaded area on our Box account. We also have 2 up-and-coming ones, basically boost your Autodesk license IQ and also boost your Autodesk installation IQ as well. And without further ado, the first thing at the very start, before you decide to set up your license server, we need to know what it's supported on. So we get this question a lot. Basically, Windows XP, Vista, and Server 2003 is not supported. So we have some reports that it will run on 2003, but just to kind of future-proof yourself, you definitely want to consider moving to a newer OS. And the reason is because Microsoft doesn't support these operating systems anymore. So if Microsoft doesn't support it, we can't support it as well. So the big thing now is, we want to basically increase your IQ for setting up the license server, and I usually just call it a quick start guide. And we have it on Linux and we also have it on the Mac, but today we're only going to be focusing on Windows. And there's a whole bunch of steps along the way. And so I try to glue all the Autodesk knowledge articles into one post, basically, to kind of help you with that. And the first step is you need to get your network license manager. So if you're completely a rookie in this is the first thing you have to do. You have to get you have to get it installed on the server. And then basically the next step is you need to get a license file, and that's actually a 2-step process. You have to get it in 2 locations. The first one is on the sub center. When you log in, you have to go on. Once you log in, if you're the contract administrator, you should be able to basically find your serial number for your product. And then the second step is you have to go to register once to get the license file. So that's a 2-step process. Okay. Another thing too is if you're the contract administrator, you can actually pass that job to someone else in your team, because anyone can get the license file as long as they belong to your company. So you can, if you've already given them an account to log in, for example, they can actually request or generate a license. Okay. And then basically the third step is configuring the LM tools. And normally at this step, you're almost like 50% done basically, because it's like this is the process. You get your NLM, you get your license file, and you configure it. But actually, the next couple steps is basically the troubleshooting part of it, just to make sure that you don't have to call support basically. And the first step is you have to check your firewall and the ports so that they're open and a client machine can actually connect to the server. That's a really important step. And then if that is not working, we basically go to the next troubleshooting step, and that's basically opening the firewall ports so that you can actually connect to the server. And then usually at this point, we might get a call saying we're still not able to connect to the server. And at that point, it's a matter of just making sure that on the client machine, I usually just make sure, hey, your licpath.lic file, make sure it's pointing to the server. So a lot of times, for example, if you install your software and you've mistyped your server name, for example, it won't connect. So we usually check that. There's also a couple other variables as well that you can also check. But basically, we just check the client machine, make sure it's pointing to the right server, and it should be good. Okay? And without further ado, we're going to be doing a lot, and it's basically pretty easy. That's what I'm trying to get. So there's basically 6 big steps. And now we're into the live demo of this presentation. So I'm going to do everything as if we're doing it, live. All right.
Hey, David, so, before we even get into the demo, let's ask a couple questions here to our audience. One is, have you ever set up a license server before? So if this is your first time seeing this process, this will be really good for you. If you've gone through this many times before, hopefully David will be providing some newer tips and tricks or a smoother workflow. So if you can answer, that would be great. We're getting right now about 3/4 of the audience, maybe a little less, have. Just give us another about 5 seconds for everyone to vote in. Okay. And let me just share that response. You can see right now how the audience is very much 3/4. They have gone through this process before, maybe for the better or the worse, and possibly you actually to call in to get it completed. But either way, the next question is, do you have any tips and tricks to share? So as you're watching David go through his presentation, if there's something that you think would be great to share with the audience, provide that in the questions panel, and then we can bring that up and have either David respond to that. It's probably tips and tricks they're aware of, or maybe not, but either way, it's something to bring up. So most of the audience said no, but there actually were a couple that said yes, they probably do. And just think about it throughout the next portion of the presentation and bring it up. So at that point, Dave, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, cool. So the first question is, I actually downloaded all the NLMs, all the versions that we get. And the easiest thing to do is, I'm on a 64-bit OS, so I'm going to install the IPv4 64-bit NLM. I'm not even going to worry about the IPv6 right now because basically the NLM is actually dual mode in the newer versions. So in 11.12, I'll demonstrate that in a moment. But really, all you really need is the IPv4. Okay. Another tip. Here's going to be a tip here. Tip. Is that I always look, if you double-click the installer, for some of I noticed like for the 32-bit ones, it defaults to install here. I always just kind of revert it back if you're gonna install it, to revert it back to the Autodesk folder. It's more standardized. So I kind of like rifled through each one of these, and I just went, oh, that one says install, and then basically this IPv, the 64-bit is Autodesk. So I'm just going to go for it, hit install. Another reason why I like to put in the install folder is when I run, let's say, AutoCAD 2015, my installer, it actually defaults to C Autodesk. So that's a good thing to kind of keep consistent. All right. So I'm just going to hit install. I'm going to hit next. I usually choose everyone. It's just my habit, and I just hit next, and it's just autopilot at this point. Now what happens is there is a URL where you can get the NLM software. I usually just Google Autodesk Network License Manager software. You can also grab it from the installer within AutoCAD under Install Tools and Utilities over here. Okay, you can grab from there as well. So we're just going to just go through this install really quickly and hit close. So right off the bat, you're going to get your LM tools on your desktop. The next thing that a lot of times, if it's a new system, and I've kind of demoed it here, but what I'd like to do is see how there's no extensions in here, right? So there's again a tip. I always like to show file extensions, and it's under here. Apply. Okay. I like to see file extensions. That's really important. It's going to help us out. Another thing too is, depending on how the server is set up, I always like to give sharing or security under users full control. because you want to, if you have someone help you out or something, you want to make sure that anyone that logs in can edit the file or move it or change it or something like that. It just makes it a lot easier. Another reason why is that when you're in here, you can actually right mouse click, and you'll have more options to create like text files and whatnot. So if you don't have the correct permissions, you won't be able to get to this kind of like sub menu basically. All right, so that's a tip. And the first thing we want to do is I usually make my license files English sounding. So in this case, this is like I created an AutoCAD license file over here. And in this case, you know, if you have a company name, I'd call it something like, let's say Acme Autodesk or Autodesk 2015. I don't like to put it version specific maybe because you might have other products other than AutoCAD in there. So, you know, it's good to kind of, you know, like maybe version it 2015 or something like that. I also have another tool here. It's called the license. Oh, by the way, when you're getting the license file, this is what I want to show you as well. Because I'm not a contract administrator, this is where you're getting the license file. I don't have the contract administration window, but I can still actually download the software. And once I log in and register once, I can still put a serial number to try and generate a license file, assuming that I have an account as well. So that's one part of the license file. So this is just an example of step number 2, getting the license file. Okay, so now that we have the license file, we're configuring it, and again, we just had to, you know, remove the extensions there, and I just kind of name it more easy to understand. That's your company name, product, year, and usually what I also do is, this is like the file itself, and if you're just kind of curious about how it looks in plain English, because there's a lot of code in there, we have this thing called the license parser. We use it all the time, every day. And so I usually just kind of drill down to that folder and just kind of look at that file, and it'll tell you a lot of important things in there, like the server name, MAC address, serial number. That's my test one. I did a temp one for 30 days, so usually for expiration for commercial customers, we'll say permanent and an issue date. The issue date is pretty important. We can discuss something about that for the next week's seminar, but issue date is pretty important as well. And then this is telling you that you're on subscription 3 versions back. Okay, so what I try to do here is I like to kind of match, because we can see the file extension, I always kind of relabel the same file name and just put a log extension in here, because when you're configuring the LM tools, it'll actually, you can see the lick and log file. So this is really important. In some of our documentation, we discuss like that you should create a license and log file or license and log folder. It's a good idea to do that sometimes, but because I like to try and set it up the easy way, you'll see in a second why I like doing it. So we'll just start off with the LM tools. We do the default configuration. There's a FlexLM Service 1 here. I'm just going to hit Browse. I'm going to choose my LMGRD, Browse, choose my license file, and because I put it all in the same folder, I just kind of rubber band it. I just go back and forth. I check on Use Services, Start Server Power Up, save it, yes. And I just do stop, start, and reread. So that's kind of like a summary of configuring the tools. Now, one of the things that I want to show you, this is going to be the quote-unquote tip part of our presentation, is that I actually don't like FlexLM Service 1 in here. And the only way you can rename this service is by stopping the server and recreating it. And I'll give you an example why. Over here, if I bring up my Task Manager, go under the Services tab, and if I go in here for F for FlexNet Service 1, that is actually the service, and it started. So this is like an easy way to check if your server is running. Okay. Another thing is under Processes, you'll see ADSK Flex in here. That's basically the 2 things that are required to run the server. There's ADSK Flex and LMGRD over here. Now the next question is, there's 2 LMGRDs, and this has been around since the dawn of time, but if you go to Properties, it's actually the same one. It's our service. So don't be alarmed if you see 2 of them in here. Normally you would see 1 service, but it's actually the same. So if you had like 2 FlexNet products, let's say like Esri ArcGIS and an Autodesk product, you would see 4 LMGRDs in there. You can just check it by the properties of it. So anyways, so as I go back in here under Service 1, I don't like this name. It's not very descriptive for me. So what I can do now is I'm just going to stop the server. I'm going to remove the service, and I'm just going to call it I love Autodesk as an example. And I'm going to hit browse. Again, because they're all in the same folder, I just have to click LMGRD. Now, in some of the other documentation, if you had to go to the license folder, you'd have to jump between up and down folders. So I just like to hit open, choose my file, open, choose the log file, open, check on use services, check server startup. This is really important. This is a service, and this is what this is here. And this is start server power. This is important too because when you reboot your server, that's what that checkbox does as well. All right, and I'm going to hit Save Service. I'm going to hit Stop, Start. Now what happens when I hit Stop, Stop, Stop? It says unable to stop. It's because when it's stopped, you can't stop something. So that's why. So that's an OK error message. So I'm just going to hit Stop a couple more times just to make sure. Again, I'm going to go into my processes and make sure that I don't have anything running. So because I had some problems before with the test, usually what you can do is you can go back into your LMGRD and just kind of end them. That's another tip, just to make sure that your server will start up correctly. And then I'll just hit Start, Relicense File.
Hey Dave, one thing to realize is that your speed of talking I think is okay, but the screen is just slightly behind where you're talking. So just keep that in mind. Yep.
Thanks. So once that's there, I can actually hit Perform Status Inquiry and everything's back up. And again, if I go into the Task Manager, because I called the service I Love Autodesk, if I go back up here under the I, under Services, you'll see this I Love Autodesk as a service. Okay. Another thing too is if you go into your Start menu and type in Services, right, you can see that it's also noted in there as well. So you can use the Task Manager to kind of check everything as well. Again, if I go to the letter I, you can see it says starting because it's already started. All right. So now we're into the kind of like troubleshooting portion of the presentation basically. And one of the cool things that you can do is, Autodesk licensing, it uses a couple of ports, and it's all documented, in our knowledge network. And because I already know them, this is a quick test. Oops, maybe I should use a different home page. And you can only use Internet Explorer or Firefox to do the test. But basically, a quick test to see if the port is open is if you type in http:// the server name and then quote the port number basically. So I can go in here and just type in 2080. Now because my laptop's already been configured for it, if you see this code, it means that the port is open. Okay. And a test is if I go back in here and stop my server, for example, and it's not running, if I reload this, you'll get page not found. And that's kind of like expected behavior. So that's another way of testing if your server is licensing Autodesk products. So if I start this back up again and reload it again, that's a way. And the thing is, there's two ports that Autodesk looks at. It's 2080 for ADSK Flex and 27,000, which is the other port number. And yeah, it can vary, so you'd only know by the log file basically. Okay. Now we're just going to go into the log file really quickly, just to kind of give you a quick. I can show you how the log file looks. It will kind of tell you in here. This discusses, like, even though I'm running IPv4, there's a note for IPv6, so it's actually kind of running in dual mode. And it'll tell you the port numbers over here for 2080. And then also in the LM tools, when we do a perform status inquiry, it'll tell you some port numbers in here as well. And it's noted right over here, 27,000. Okay. So this test for the port number, you should do this on the server. The server is always going to work, but on the client machines, you should also test this. So you use basically the same URL. Server name, port number, and that will kind of check the firewall really quickly. If you do this in any other browser other than IE and Firefox, if you do it in Chrome, you'll get a different behavior. So it's best to have like multiple browsers. So this is my Chrome. It does something. It just downloads a file. So just to let you know, you just have this will only work in in IE and Firefox. So I can give you a quick demo of this as well over here in the different browsers. So that's a tip. It gives you this code in here. That's usually saying port is open. All right. So the next item is I always do firewall. So firewall is pretty important. I'm going to bring it to the control panel. And I usually, for me, this is again a tip, is that I like category view. This is more the small view. This is like the traditional Windows XP view. I prefer using category view because I normally just uninstall or reinstall programs. But if I need to do a search for a particular setting in a control panel, I just type in firewall in the search. I just kind of go through it pretty quickly. Another thing too is, if I needed to, look at an NVIDIA control panel because I have an NVIDIA card, you don't even have to search for it anymore. So less icons is easier. So usually I just, again, firewall, and I just go firewall. Now,
hey David, could you, it seems
my
like your
company
screen
laptop.
is frozen a little bit. Could you stop sharing and sharing again, see if that updates it?
Sure. Can you see the firewall control panel?
Not yet. Let's do this. Let's
Nope,
make,
you're 2 minutes behind. You're 2 or 3 minutes behind.
yeah, because your clock's saying 11:21. Let me make myself the presenter,
Okay.
and then we'll switch it back to you.
I just stopped sharing my screen.
Okay, try sharing again. Sorry about that, everybody. You sharing your screen, Dave?
Yes, I think I am. Yep.
Dave, well, that's waiting to share.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
You good?
Yep.
I just want to let everyone know, even though we're having some technical difficulties, I actually had in the presentation when I review it, I've actually uploaded videos on our screencast site, so you can review the videos there as well. Okay, so even though we're recording this session, you'll be able to kind of review the steps in the screencast. Okay, so over here we have firewall on or off. Usually, I always make sure that it's turned off, but sometimes it's better to just add the rule because if your computer reboots after a Windows update, it may automatically turn it back on again. So to basically open the firewall settings, you go to under Advanced Settings and wait for it to come up. And it's always how I remember it is it's an inbound rule. So that's a tip. Always an inbound rule. Tip. Because you want to let someone come into the server. That's how so let's say you launch an Autodesk product. It has to go into the server, so it's like I want to allow that to come in. So that's how I remember it. And so I just kind of go in here, hit New Rule. I hit Port Number, hit Next, and then the first port rule is 2080. That's for ADSK Flex. I hit Next, allow the connection. I just hit Default. And over here, this is a tip again. I usually type in Autodesk 2080. And basically, this is like an easy way. It's like, that's for Autodesk. That's my port number. So because I created it, I know the rule. I hit another rule again, hit Port, hit Next. And this is a range of ports, 27,000 to 27,009. So it covers all of it with one rule. Hit Next, Next, Next. Again, I just call it Autodesk, 27,000 to 27,008 or 2009. And then I hit Finish. And so I have the two rules. That covers everything. And that covers basically the firewall portion of our setup. And basically the next thing is I've actually set up a remote desktop to my workstation, and because I have a lot of products on there.
Hey Dave, while you're logging into that, Where are the screencast recordings? Are you going to have that in a slide in the PowerPoint that you upload?
Yeah, it's a slide. Yep, it'll be a slide in the PowerPoint.
Perfect.
Yep. So over here, I just go to like C program files Autodesk, and I just do a lickpath.lic file, and this is where you can kind of like confirm whether it's looking at the server or not. And so I have a lot of products installed, and I'll let it kind of continue here. And basically, it should also default to Notepad. I prefer using Notepad to edit the LIC files, LIC files. And over here, I just kind of use an example. This is my, I did this demo a while ago, so it's like you could put it in like, you know, test server. Now, a lot of times, like, you know, for example, test server, you know, a lot of people, they'll kind of like copy this server name, for example, but because I do this a lot, I just kind of like highlight the whole thing, copy it, and this is a tip. You can just kind of hit save, and again, you just kind of like, you can select it. So that way, you don't have to spend time like mousing in the file. You just have to select all and save it to the new server name. And so I can go into like over here, there's like some other tests that I was doing, just do that. So that's like, so if my server was called test server, I can just easily edit that file. Another thing too is because I have discussed the permissions, I actually went to my Autodesk folder here, and I actually went to properties, and I just made sure that under security I have users full control again, or I've added everyone. So again, the only reason, I'm an administrator, but if you want to be able to edit the lick path file easily, I would just add everyone as users, and then that you can do it yourself basically. You don't have that problem with permissions going from trying to save and C program files basically. All right, and that is about it. So I'm going to minimize this. I'm just going to quickly summarize the presentation. Now, this is the first thing is, you know, getting the Network License Manager. Usually the tip is you can Google it, Autodesk Network License Manager. You can also get it from the media. This is like the link for the knowledge base article. I also change install to Autodesk so that everything is defaulting to Autodesk. I also discuss how to edit permissions as well. So this is like the screencast video. Again, I'll be uploading this presentation to our site so you can review it later. The next thing is you need to get a license file. Again, you have to have contract administration. The license file, if you already don't know, it's just basically a Notepad text file with an LIC extension. I always use Notepad because I don't want to add any special characters or rich text formatting to the file that can affect it. Another tip is basically you can basically log in and generate a license file if you're with that company. So you don't have to be the contract administrator to generate that file. If you have more than one serial number, you should generate them all on the same day. There's a couple of articles about that. We can actually discuss a bit more about that next week. I always use a license parser to check the file. That's a really good tip. Number 3, configuring the NLM. I prefer not using a default name. I always use a customized name basically when doing that. It makes it a lot easier to kind of figure out, especially if you have more than one service. I also create a lick and log file. That way it's easier to configure the NLM. I always enable file extensions. And I also discuss like the task manager, looking at the ADSK Flex and LMGRD. So a cool tip is that as soon as you log into the server, you don't even have to open the NLM. You actually can just open up your task manager. You see these two processes running, your server's probably running okay. And then again, I always check for services to see if the services are started up. So that's part of the default name. Again, there's a screencast for that as well. I always check the firewall and add in exceptions. They're kind of like a combination of things. I always add the ports even if the firewall is off, again, because it may automatically turn itself back on. It could be a group policy at your company. A lot of times customers will say, is your firewall off? And in the control panel actually will say that it's off, but you won't know unless you look into services. So again, I always add the rules anyway. So if you add the rule, you don't even have to worry about if it's on or off basically. A lot of times people also tell us that they can ping the server and they'll say everything is on, how come I can't connect to the license server? And again, you know, pinging is only telling you that the computer's on. It's not actually letting you know if the port is available. So these are all kind of like tips and tricks. checking the client computers. Again, it's very important to make sure it's pointing to the right server. There's actually, this is really good, if the company is a little bit smaller, you can edit the lick path file. That's a quick test to see that if it's working on one test machine, and then you can actually afterwards set up an environment variable to point to the server. Again, there's a screencast for that, and there's also other documentation that discusses that. Finally, as a review, I have all the steps glued together on our blog that kind of discusses that. And again, the AKN articles are separated, but so I kind of put them all together. So I just kind of glued it together to make it easier. And I kind of referenced it, the 6 main steps. You got to get your NLM. You got to get your license file. You got to configure it, the NLM. You got to check your firewall. You have to open the firewall, and then you check the client computers. And basically, if you can do this, you will never call us again, unless there's like some complication of like another product or something. If you have more than one service, we had some issues about that. But again, we can discuss that next week. And finally, on our blog, we have a lot of tips and tricks on our blog as well. And basically, we have, this is like our home base. We use it. I use it every day to kind of find information, basically. And I've kind of grouped it in our nav. There's like the knowledge network. We hit our knowledge base, help docs, install forms, certified hardware, system requirements, screencasts. Screencasts, and also the virtual agent. That's where we can download software if you are trying to find older versions of the software. Another thing too, one of the big ones that have recently come up is screencasts. I've been using that a lot, and that's really helpful because if you're trying to describe a problem, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a video is it's priceless. So it's usually if you have a video of something that really helps us out troubleshoot an issue. There's some products that I use, as well, which is Pixlr. It's a free, it's an image editor that I use a lot for, editing images on the blog. And also, again, I just want to discuss, screencasts. I use it all the time. It's a great tool. And anyways, if you have any questions, this is our question period here.
Yeah, Dave. Yep, I got a few here. I'm going to go through a few here, give you a break. One thing I like, my best tip is earlier on you were mentioning when you were creating a service. Do yourself a favor when you're creating a service on your license manager, make the server a name that you will recognize. You need to take into consideration that you're probably going to look at your license manager once, maybe twice a year for most people. You want to make sure you name it something that you're going to recognize if you were ever on that server troubleshooting something else different. So if somebody were to pop open the services panel and just see FlexLM, they might not recognize that those are licenses, so they might stop the service and try to do something else. But if you had named your service Autodesk Licenses, for example, you're going to think twice before you stop that service because you know it's licenses and you know it has to do with Autodesk. So it'll be a better visual representation of what's actually going on. So every now and again we see somebody's having a problem with their licenses and like, why aren't these working? And then you get in the server and you're like, well, somebody stopped the service and no one knows why. But if it was named something they wouldn't recognize, they would be more likely to just shut off a service they can't identify. So it will be useful for you if you were to name it something that you would easily recognize down the road. A few questions here. The question was, is it better to use IPv4 or IPv6? First thing I would always do is match what you have on your system. So I would open up a command line and I would type in ipvconfig/all and see if you have an IPv6 address. If you have an IPv6 address, install the IPv6 license manager. I would only, in that situation, turn to an IPv4 license manager if I were troubleshooting some sort of a complexity that was not working properly with IPv6. It's rare. Occasionally it happens. Both managers should install anyway, but you usually want to match that architecture. Question about commenting a lick path file. I'm not sure if that was a license file or a lick path file, but it's good to note the differences between the two. Every now and again, somebody has a problem, and we ask them to send us their license file, and they send us their lick path file. Lick path file is just a pointing file in your installation folder. That is one of the methods the program will use to point to a license server. So it contains inside it, some zeros. It contains a couple of words, and it contains a server name or potentially a server IP address. You should be able to comment out the file with a pound symbol, I believe. Usually people don't comment the lick path file, they comment their license file. So if you're commenting your license file, all you should need to do is put a pound symbol before the sentence you're using. So I would enter in a couple of carriage returns, and I put a pound symbol, and I would say, if you're identifying something in your file, whatever that may be, you would put it right after that. So if you broke onto multiple lines, you're going to need to use multiple pound symbols as well. All right. We had a comment about the license parser. Someone said for a while now it's been listed as beta, and there's been no about in there. It looks like a hacker phishing site. Will it be improved? I've never heard it described that way, but I can completely understand that description. I will make sure this gets forwarded along to the right people to make it look more secure and official. That's definitely something we like to get in there.
Yeah, I like that one that he posted. I was like, yeah, I could see that. I hadn't thought about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They asked about a little more clarity for pinging your server to see if it's available from a client workstation. That should be a simple command in your Internet Explorer. You type in HTTP : 2 slashes. You type in the server name and then a colon, not a semicolon. Your server name, a colon, and then the port you want to check. The basic ports 2080 and 27,000. If you press enter, you should see a couple of gibberish characters up there. If you see the gibberish characters, you should be connecting just fine. If you get a failed page, one of the good old Internet Explorer failures, no page found, you're not able to connect. All right.
I had a couple questions that I noticed that were coming through. What about vendor paths?
Sure.
I see that sometimes become a mess when I used to help users with setting up network licensing.
So you mean vendor path in terms of, are we talking about the client workstation, or are we talking about the memory of LM tools?
Kind of the memory of LM tools when you go into the, I think it's the second or third tab, and then you look at vendor paths.
Gotcha. So I think that usually is in reference to if I were upgrading my license manager and I uninstalled my current, I stopped the service, I uninstalled my current manager, I installed the new one, and it naturally remembered the paths for the last service that I created. And now if the pathing for the new installation is in a different folder, those paths are now wrong. It will remember your last service. It does that. If you delete the service, it will clear that memory. Also, you'll notice that when you create a new service, when you select that first field, it should remember the path you've been installed to. Once you select the lmgrd.exe file, the second field will attempt to go to that exact same folder as the one above it. But the only way to really clear it out is to stop and delete the service completely. There was a question about, someone had mentioned about fixing ports. So in your license file, you can do two different things to ports, and it's important to know that there's a difference between two of them. Dave, can you pull up a license file for us?
Yep, doing it right now.
Awesome. So there are two different things you could theoretically do here, and these are things you would do in troubleshooting situations. You don't normally need to do it. Generally, I see this as something that people end up doing if they're running other licenses on their server. For instance, a lot of simulation products that are non-Autodesk will use the same ports that we use, and the services will crowd each other out. So in this case, you can make two adjustments. The most common adjustment is what David did here. He put in 27,001. If you save this file, you stop the service and restart it, it will bind this license file to that port, which means the port that is normally crowded is 27,000. Our products are designed to look for a range. It'll look for 27,000 through 27,009. So if you just bind it to one, I usually split the uprights. I usually go 27,005. Doesn't really matter as long as it's different than 27,000. This will change in some cases. It'll change a license file from not being able to start and run on a server to immediately running. And that's because something else is crowding port 27,000. So if I were having trouble starting a license that I knew was a good license and was configured for the server, one of the things I would do is I'd come in here, I'd change that. I put a space after the MAC address on that top line, and I type in 27,001 or any other basically, I would avoid 27,000 because that tends to be the one that is default used by other products. And then we save the file and we start it up. In some rare cases, you can also change the vendor ADSK Flex port 2080. I've seen people change that to 2085. However, I've seen that be a necessity on less than maybe 3 cases in the last 6 years where that was something that actually needed to happen, and it was because something else happened to be blocking that port. It's rare, but it could be done. Usually a binding of the 27,001 port or anything up to 9 is sufficient. Okay, question just came through. Dave, how about this one? Is ordering licenses in the license file still important?
Yes, I mean, I always use a license parser to kind of guide you through setting it, like making sure that it looks okay. I usually put like the increment licenses first, and then like the cheapest one, like AutoCAD, and then let's say Building Design Suite Standard below it. Or if you had like Building Design Suite Standard, Premium, and Ultimate, I always put Standard first, and then Premium and Ultimate. So
yeah, it shouldn't affect the way licenses are pulled. Let's put it that way.
it just looks nicer.
There were a couple of cases I recall years back where potentially the order may have mattered in 1 or 2 minor cases, but I've not seen that for years. The licenses are dealt with as a group, so they're read on the license server, and the order with which they are pulled is pre-coded. It's already built. So what happens is all that information is read at once. A license is requested. The license server says, "Oh, I give you this one first." So the physical order shouldn't matter. People would order things to make it more understandable. So say you've got a big license file. Like here's easy. We got one license in here. We got AutoCAD 2015. But let's say you have 5 different serials of AutoCAD 2015, and they're scattered throughout the license file, and you're looking at it, and you get a really long file. Visually, you might want to arrange that in something that's more logical. So you'd cluster all your AutoCADs together. You'd cluster your increments together. You might comment out the file. Anything that might make it easier for you were you to have to update this license 6 months down the road. You want to make sure I get all the right products upgraded. You want to make sure that everything is actually showing up properly. That's when you'd probably reorder it, but it doesn't affect the physical pulling and what gets pulled where.
Here's a question on some legacy license file about 2011 and 2012.
Yes.
Any issues with bringing in those increments into a more up-to-date license file?
Great question.
No.
I have something on the blog, and I just kind of type in, because we get this a lot, previous use. You can see I've already Google searched this, and under previous use, there's a previous use request, and it kind of redirects you to our solution for that, to request an older license. Because by default oh look, it's down. We'll have to fix that. My apologies. Looks like we'll have to check that article and make sure it still exists, because that's the old Autodesk article. But basically, there's an article that maybe it's under AKN. Maybe I'll have to fix that blog post. My apologies. Let's do a search. Previous use. Previous use. Previous.
While you're going through that, can you actually set up multiple services? Like, let's say instead of organizing one big license file, can you actually break apart each license file, like one for all your AutoCADs, one for your suites, one for your simulation products, and just create multiple services?
That's something you cannot do. I see that question came through a few ways. Autodesk licenses need to run on one kernel at the same time. Those licenses just need to be combined into one file. Basically, if you try to run more than one LMGRD at the same time from the same version, they will crash into each other, and one or both won't work. Sometimes you'll even see that if somebody's had a license running on an older machine, an older server for a while, and then they're changing up to a new one, and they click stop, and it doesn't actually stop the service, and they create a new service, and then you're backtracking what's going on, and you will find old services that are still running combined with new services, and one or both or all will cancel out. So it's important that you have one service. All your Autodesk licenses should be in the same file. Okay, the question about when you're updating existing licenses, are you required to recreate older licenses? Okay, so when you're getting new licenses, say this is a 2015 file. If my file before this was 3 seats of AutoCAD 2014, and I'm upgrading to 15, I don't need the 2014 licenses at all, so those can be ignored because the file was upgraded to 15. In that case, what you would have would be you have 2015 licenses. In this case example here, this is a package license. It will open older versions. What you do not have is 3 licenses of AutoCAD 15 plus 3 licenses of AutoCAD 14 from last year. That would equal 6 licenses. You have just 3. So the older stuff would drop off. In cases where you are using legacy licensing that is beyond the scope of a single package license, and a package license is the license you get when your license is on subscription. It lets you open prior versions. This particular license will open 15, 14, 13, and 12. If you had somebody that was using AutoCAD 2011 still on their machine, and you just upgraded to 2015, you would need to get a 2011 license file created at the same time as this file to compensate for the older licenses. The logic behind the licensing is that when you put in a new license and a license has been upgraded, it has to cancel out the old stuff, otherwise it would be adding multiplications of licenses. So if we plugged in a 15 license on top of a 14 license and they were to work together, they would just be adding seats to each other, and that's not what happens. The seats are upgraded, so now you have that same number for a newer seat. So you would need to get exceptions for older licenses that go past the prior use.
Hey Dave, if you were to still have your old 2011 license file, from years ago, could you just attach that to the end of your increment package for 2015 through 2012?
No.
In most cases, no. In very rare cases, yes, but almost always no, because it's the same. It would be the same product code.
Same code. Yeah. Now what happens is I try to look up how to obtain a network license like previous use, and I'll have to double check the article because it's currently offline, but there was a how-to for that, so I'll have to double check on that. So I have a feeling that link, the TS link, would have worked, but we'll have to double check. So we'll take that offline. I'll just check on that article.
You might be able to use the Google Cache option
Dave,
if you go back
about
there.
SAM report.
Go to the down arrow and just go to the cache and see if that actually is still there.
Oh, it's still there as cache.
There we go. Thanks to Poster to
Google
suggest
Cache.
that.
Yeah.
Everyone always knows it's there, but you always forget it's there, right?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Davey, we have a SAM report light question.
Yeah, that's a good one. If SAM report Lite hasn't been available for quite some time.
Yeah, it was a third-party product to start with.
Yeah.
And it was they discontinued the development of it a few years back, so it sort of faded by the wayside.
Yeah, I think if you look up SAM report Lite on our site, it'll say that it's discontinued. So it's not a tool that is available anymore. It's a good question, though. We have a question about John Smith about requesting all the licenses. Basically, it's like when do all existing product licenses have to be created when the product license is added? Basically, if you have more than one license, it could take a long time. I agree on that part. Now, what happens is before you used to be able to log a case into product support. It would go to the front desk team, and they would do the licenses for you. So they would do, like, if you had like AutoCAD, Building Design Suite, Factory Design Suite, all of it, they could do it for you, and then all they're doing is they're just manually combining it and sending it to you. So I just found that if you have access to register once, and you have all your serial numbers, it's just a matter of just cutting and pasting. So it's going to be a lot faster to kind of do self-serve.
I mean, index card port. All right, Royce, do you see anything else on the list we missed?
Let's see here. There's one here I don't think you guys could really address because probably not your case, but
yeah,
about using IP6 on an IP4, and somebody from Autodesk said you'd use a hotfix. It's from Jan Sacco, around 1038 or 1138 East Coast.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Like 9 times out of 10, in the newer, the with the newer tools like the 11.12, I think I mentioned this already, but you'll notice, like, even though I installed the IPv4 version, we get this question into product support a lot. It's basically, you see this, why is this saying IPv6? And basically this IPv4 version is actually running in dual mode. It kind of is running both at the same time. So, in what Dave had mentioned before, like Dave Demkowski, about using IPv4, IPv6, sometimes you have to use IPv6. I usually, do it step by step, like troubleshooting. So, on the blog, where I kind of glued all the pieces together under Quick Start Windows, it's like the last step of it if you ever have the problem. So it's kind of like you got to get your NLM, and there's a link for it. There's an ACAN article. You have to get your license file. Again, there's like an ACAN article for that. Then configuring it, there's an ACAN article. So if you go through all these steps and you go to step number 6 and you check that as well and it's still not working, then the last step is IPv6. That's like kind of like my last steps. You don't, I'd rather do it in order, because if everything works with IPv4, then you don't have to worry about it. So I think, and that also answered another question from, who was it? Sorry, a little further up, Troy, where he asked, like, is there a step to do it all at once? This is the page that I use to reference everything, basically, to kind of glue it all together. And there's some articles, again, about IPv6 in there. So it's all, like, put in one shot. Again, I've also, when I upload the presentation, they'll have videos of each step, basically, so you can kind of, like, review it as well if you want. So it's all noted in there. Do we have any other questions, Dave?
The last one is alternatives for the SAM report.
Alternate for SAM report. There were a few on the market. One of them was a free one. Oh, that was JTB Flex Report. Yeah, that's what I was looking for, I think.
Yeah, I love that one. Thanks,
Oh yeah, you can get that one in the App Exchange, right? Like there's a.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, I've been referring customers to that as well. JTB Flex Report. Thanks.
Some people want that extra layer of reporting knowledge with what's being used. Usually you see it with clients that have more limited listings of licenses, or they have big pools of divergent licenses. So if someone just had an organization where we get 10 seats of AutoCAD, having a reporting system is probably not as valuable as the person that has 10 seats of AutoCAD, 2 of AutoCAD Electrical, 1 of a suite, 1 of something else, and they got to figure out who's using what, when, and why, and do they need to get more. So for the more complex licensing configurations, people seem to need a little more reporting out of it.
The last question we had, or the close to 11:55, does NLM perform home calling to Autodesk? No. NLM only connects to your local system. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't connect to Autodesk at all. OpenLM. So basically, one of the attendees mentioned, other than JTP report, there's OpenLM for reporting as a reporting tool.
Okay, guys, I think this is a good time to wrap it up. Before we even let people go, just want to launch one simple question. Did you find this useful? This is a webinar series we're probably going to be doing weekly, and I hope you find it useful. We'll cover different topics in every week, and maybe at some point we'll ask you what products you really want to hear about. Maybe we'll do product install tips and tricks for AutoCAD or Maya or some sort of simulation product. So pretty much, a resounding yes, so that really makes us feel good. Appreciate that. And at this point, I want to thank David and David for doing the presentation and providing feedback in the Q&A section. And you'll get an invite for future webinars, but you can also check out the forum, and there'll be a landing site there that is tagged to the top, and you can see all the up-and-coming ones, and you can register for those as well. So at this point, I will thank everybody for joining, and have a great day.